It's my privilege to be able to introduce our missionary guests this morning. It is hard to believe that 7 years ago, this was us, and I didn't realize till actually we brought up this prayer card. You look at the dates there on the prayer card. It was exactly 7 years ago that we were there in Nicaragua serving alongside you, and that was just a special, special time. And Mark and Jen Holsinger have been serving in Nicaragua, specializing in children's ministry there. I won't give too much away. I don't want to take away from your time, but of course, serving in the feeding center there, help establishing that and doing great work at the ministry center as well. It truly is an incredible ministry to be able to see that firsthand. Just speaking personally, just for a second, I just want to say it was life-changing for me. And I know we come back from mission trips and say that, but it truly was. It changed my heart, and it was just a blessing to be part of that and to see that. And I believe today, as they share, your hearts will be changed as well. And it's just a blessing to hear what God is doing through them and has done through them. And it's been our privilege, really, to support you all these years and just walk alongside you and pray alongside you. It's just a thrill for us. It really is. So I want to invite you to come, Mark and Jen, and share with us and what God has on your heart.
Thank you. Good morning. It is amazing to think that was 7 years ago. For us, we were still fairly new then, and so that was a great privilege to have this team come who did a great job, had a lot of passion, were willing to learn, well prepared, all of those things that you need for a team. And it's great to look back. Last night we were looking through the pictures, just flipping through and thinking about those great memories. And it's great to be with all of you this morning. Thank you, Pastor Jeff, for offering your pulpit to us. We've considered it a great privilege to be here in front of all of you. Right before we left for the mission field, my wife turned 40. I know it's hard to believe. She doesn't even look 40 now. But I had a surprise birthday party for her, and that's a long story about how she made it super hard to make it a surprise. But I finally got her. We had it at our church, our home church. And when we arrived there with an excuse for why we had to stop by the church, she walked into this room full of people, and she didn't know why they were there, and she said, "Wow, I like all these people. Why wasn't I invited to this?" And so that's how we feel this morning. We feel like, wow, I like all these people. We're really glad to be here with you guys. And we can't adequately express our thankfulness for how you supported us from the very beginning, before we even left for the field, when we felt like we were fake because we hadn't done anything or gone anywhere. You supported us and loved us. And your prayers and your encouragement, your financial support has been a vital part of all that has been accomplished by God in Nicaragua and for our family. But that was a long time ago when we started out, and God has taught us a lot over those years. Back at the very beginning, back in 15 years ago, God was calling us to the mission field, and I kept saying, no, God, I can't do that. All these different excuses. I don't know where you were sending us. I don't know how I would do that. And how's that going to affect my family? All of those things kept coming back. And some of you remember me telling this story, but when I would sit in a service and there would be a missionary come, it felt like God was talking to me through them. And specifically through Tom Wolfe, who you all love and like we do, or more than we do even. And it was him that finally, at a dinner, said, I think God's calling you. You need to be obedient. And so thank goodness for that, for Tom's willingness to speak truth to me. And that was 13 years ago. So we spent years raising support, went to Costa Rica for Spanish, to Nicaragua in 2013 and 2014. Memorial came with the team. And back, I guess the picture on the wall, that's what it looked like when we were just starting out. And now all of our kids are graduated from high school. And that's Julia's graduation, so that's what they all look like now. But God sent us to Nicaragua. He answered that question of where, and it was Nicaragua. And a lot of you probably know where Nicaragua is located. It's located in Central America. We can go on to the next slide. It's located a little closer to the sun than Columbus. But it's in Central America, in the center of Central America. And it's tropical, hot, big lakes, volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, not quite like Ohio. And it is the second poorest country in our hemisphere, behind Haiti. And so there's a lot of physical needs, and those have become actually worse over the past. It was getting better when we first arrived, but because of some different factors, it's worse than it's ever been. But that's what God called us. To. And so I want to just talk a little bit about what that ministry has looked like over the past years. Our ministry, the source of our ministry is the church planters we work with. The ABW missionaries that we work with, we don't plant churches. We work alongside Nicaraguans that plant churches. And so we have a Bible Institute, a 2-year program for our pastors. This is the last graduating class that just graduated in May. And so all those guys there you see are out planting a church of some type in some place to scatter around Nicaragua. Sadly, the guy in the front left is not planting a church because he died of COVID about a month ago. And so keep that in your prayers. I know the whole world is struggling with this. Nicaragua in 2020 really wasn't that bad, although we never get the statistics that are listed here in the United States. But it really wasn't as bad. It was bad, but not nearly as bad as it was in other parts of the world. But now it is sweeping through Nicaragua, and we've lost several pastors and a lot of friends or friends of friends. So if you can keep that in your prayers as well. We also have, when the pastors come, at different times we have activities and teaching for the ladies as well. And this is a picture of the ladies. One of the afternoons they learned to bake cakes and decorate cakes. The guy in the middle's name is Gustavo. You'll hear a little more about him later, but he's a professional baker, and so he was teaching the class. And we just have this is a picture of our new class that just started in August, and we normally have 10 to 12 pastors at a time, but this time we have 25. So that is an awesome privilege to have that many men training to plant churches. That training happens at our ministry center. I became the director of our ministry center back in 2015, and it's a 160-acre camp that has a beautiful view of a volcano, and it has an open-air gymnasium, dining hall, pool, cabins to sleep 128 people. This is where the team stayed. And it's used for all kinds of things, for pastor training, like we just talked about, for retreats and events, for baptisms. A lot of the places don't have any place to baptize, for teams, and for them to stay, just like your team stayed. I think we have a few pictures maybe of the team when they were there. There's a bunch of people you recognize. This is our at Rayitos. There's the puppets going on, some more puppets. At the feeding center with Hazel, you'll hear more about her later. Can't skip her living up to his name. And Ruby meeting a monkey. She really enjoyed that. I'm sure you've heard that story. You're going back to that? She's smiling with happiness there. And then our camp ministry, I'm going to stop right here for just a second. So the camp ministry, we had an opportunity to partner with a foundation that provided money to do camp, and that camp took off. I became director of the camp in 2015 just as we were starting this new ministry, and it grew to so fast every year from 2015 to 2018. It was growing like crazy. Up until the 2017, we had 10,000 campers, and 1,000 of them came to know Christ. And you think, well, that's an awesome thing that's happening. God's blessing this. And then 2018 hit. In April 2018, we were here in 2018 talking with you all and shared this. God allowed Nicaragua to go through some really tough times politically, and there was protests and fighting in the streets, and we ended up having to leave Nicaragua for a period of time. We were here for the second half of 2018. But in the course of that, we lost that partnership for the camp ministry. And that was tough just to understand why God would take something that was doing so well and stop it. And in some ways, we still wrestle with that. But God has provided other activities and things that happen at the center. But it was just a learning experience for us of how we have to trust God that He knows what is best. When COVID hit in 2020, we were, like a lot of you, Nicaragua kind of shut down. A lot of people in Nicaragua travel by bus, crammed in buses and things like that. So the country did shut down a lot. Churches eliminated their services. And it was in the ministry center, again, was shut down. It couldn't have groups there, which hurt us financially. So on top of the 2018 crisis, we were in a crisis again financially because we depend on renting the center to groups to fund it. But our team, in conjunction with Word of Life, we decided to do a campaign we called Soap and Hope. And we put together packets of food and cleaning supplies and those kind of things. And we went to a lot of different churches and used it as a chance to teach people about COVID and how to prevent it the best we could, and then also using that as an opportunity to share the gospel. And we delivered over 600 packages of food to all over different churches, and we had 139 decisions for Christ, which was awesome. And now we're coming to my wife's part of the program, so I'll ask her to come forward here. Many of you know my wife. I'm excited to serve God with her. She's the love of my life, my cheerleader, my best friend. She loves God and she loves people. And I'm glad to be on a team with her. In Nicaragua, at Raítas, what she's going to talk about, she's known by several different names. The first of which is Sister Jennifer, or Hermana Jennifer in Spanish. But that one's kind of fallen by the wayside. She's got new names now. She's now known as Super Jenny. Because of a story we'll tell you later about, or maybe she'll tell you about jumping in the pool to rescue a drowning little girl. And then because she loves everyone there and she's like a mom to everybody, including the pastor, they call her Super Big Mother in English. So it's Super Big Mother. So come and tell us about Raítas.
First of all, I just want to say, as Mark and I were driving over here, he says, when we come to Memorial, it's like seeing family from, that you haven't seen in a long time. And he says, I love seeing them. I hope they love seeing us too. So we just want you to know how grateful we are for the opportunity to be here, to share our ministry with you, to just to be with you. So just thank you for that. And then also, thank you for your partnership. We could not minister to these kids. We could not show them the love of Jesus, invest in their lives, invest in eternity without you. You are part of this ministry, and so we are deeply grateful for you. So for those of you that don't know about Raítas, it's a feeding center, and it's a program where we teach the kids to pray. We sing with them. We have a Bible lesson. They learn a verse, and then we feed them. And we are so thankful for the opportunity to have been involved with this soon after its inception. It started on the church members' front porch. If you look at the bottom right-hand screen, that's the front porch of somebody's house, and we would have 60 to 80 kids packed in on the benches. And Pastor Valeriano, he's the man that is in the front of the church plant right there on the front porch. Is just a wonderful man. I think that he was probably just like Jesus because he always has a smile and he's a magnet to the kids. And I think that's what Jesus was like. He wanted to start a church in this community, but because it was so dangerous with drugs and gangs, he decided to pull his center out from the center of this neighborhood, more out to the sides. And so the parents were very hard. They didn't want to learn about Jesus, and so he said, you know what, I'm going to hit the next generation. I want to reach the kids. And so that's where we started Rayitos. I love being a part of this ministry because I love the hugs. I love coming in and I love the kids running up to me and hugging me, and I love to hug them. I love that I get to be a part of a bigger team. I love that we get to feed these kids, we get to teach them about Jesus. For some of them, this is the only meal that they will eat that day. And so I just love being a part of this ministry. We started working with Rayitos in 2013, and your church came in 2014, and that was just after we had bought this property. And so we were teaching like down the sides, and so you can see that's very rough. And then in 2015, God provided the rest of the money to continue building the kitchen, the bathroom, classrooms, and the church itself. The bathroom was just a shack. And so there were caretakers that lived there, and she would tell me that every time she used the bathroom, cockroaches would bite her. And so I was so thankful. We're like, yay, the bathroom needs to be the first thing. So the bottom left is that bathroom. The bathroom was like, we just have to get that done first. And then the kitchen. And you see that Nellie's cooking over a wood fire. She is an amazing woman. She's in her 60s. She works like nobody's business. And she was cooking over wood. And then in 2015, for the very first time, she was able to cook over a gas stove. Her favorite color is blue. And so you see a lot of blue at Rayitos because we love her and we wanted to encourage her. Our numbers kept growing, and they keep growing because of COVID partly. And a lot of moms are coming, and which is really neat because we're growing it from a feeding center to more of a church. And so it is just a really neat thing to see that God is using COVID to grow his church. We have classrooms here, and we started preschool, and because it continues growing, we're adding a new, Valeriano is over his own church, which is Sendero de Luz. And then we've added Gustavo, which you saw in the picture doing the cakes, and he's going to be over Rayitos. You're going to see that this line just travels down the buildings as the kids are waiting to get inside, and those that are in the front are so excited because they sit in the very front row and they get to eat first. So there's no backseat Baptist in Rayitos. We feed the kids 5 days a week. We feed 5 days a week now. We only used to do it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but now we're doing it Tuesday through Saturday. We have approximately 250 kids a day. That's 1,250 meals a week. And we have a working budget of about $35,000 a year. We feed the kids, but we also had an awesome Christmas. We wanted to raise $4,000, and so we put it out there in prayer letters, we put it out on Facebook, and God just said, no, I'm gonna give you even more. So he doubled it. In fact, $10,000 came in, and we were able to give the kids Christmas gifts, and also in February, the school year is February to December, because January and February, December and February is their summer. And so in February, we were able to give the kids backpacks, give them, the notebooks, scissors, crayons, all of that fun stuff. So that was part of Christmas and backpacks. This is the first year that we decided, you know what? We think that we can help build some homes. So we asked the pastor, we're like, how much do you think it would be to build a home? Can you give us a budget? He said about $4,000. And we thought, okay. So it is amazing to me how God provided that money, and then actually it cost closer to $7,000. Can you imagine if I said to you, hey, I have a new house for you, come on in. It was a $7,000 house. I mean, so these people were super excited to move into this house. The families that were chosen by Pastor Valeriano are families that are extremely poor. All of them are very poor. But these families, their bed consisted of like a wooden bed with no mattress, no sheets, no pillows, no blankets. They don't have a bathroom. They don't have a shower. They had a refrigerator. They didn't have a stove. And the dirt floor, and all of their clothes were like all around the side. This is the family that received the very first house. Fabian, David, and Eliu, and the mom's name is Claudia. And I love how God is like, you know what? I see forward. You see this little piece, but I see so much more. I see the big picture. And last month, Claudia died of COVID. But God had provided a home for the family that they wouldn't have had. And he knew, and I love that he knew that. He's taking care of their family. People from the church are stepping up. And I'm thankful that they are being taken care of. There was another family that we built a house for. Her name is Hazel. She's on the one on the far left. When we got into Rayitos back in 2013, she was hit by a car, and they didn't think that she would survive. In fact, she had significant head trauma, and her leg was broken. In fact, they had to put pins in it. She was in a wheelchair for a really long time, and they didn't think that she would even survive or walk. But she did survive. And she did walk, and there she is today. And so I think that God has great plans for this family. It's also really sad because for a while they had moved away from where they are, and the conditions were really deplorable. And they were not being fed well. They didn't have good living conditions. And so it's neat to me to see how God was like, you know what, you went through that. You endured that, and look, we have a house for you. These kids, again, for the first time have beds with sheets and blankets and pillows and mattresses. For the first time, they have a toilet. For the first time, they have a shower. And so a refrigerator, a stove, and God provided all of that for like $7,000. So it's just neat to me that He used us to be able to bless and encourage this family. I shared with you about Rayitos, and no doubt there's poverty, right? Kids are malnourished, and we need to help them. So what is poverty? What would you say is poverty? In the U.S., we would probably say that it's a lack of money, right? But if you talked with the Nicaraguans, they would definitely say that it's a lack of money. But they would also say that we can see the effects of the lack of money. Like, I can't pay for a home. I can't pay for food or clothes or health care. I feel powerless and hopeless. I think about last month, Andy was helping clear some property. He's our oldest. And he is really allergic to poison ivy. And he had just this tiny little bit on his hand, and it just spread all over so fast. And you know what? I took him to that, Minute Clinic at CVS. And they're like, oh, okay, here's some steroids, and you can just take care of that. I think it was like $8 for the steroids and maybe $25 for the visit. But for them, $25 is like 2.5 days of pay. And the $8 for the meds was almost a day's work of pay. And so they don't take their kids to the doctor. They don't have the money to take their kids to the doctor. And even if they had the money, they usually use it for food. And so that's what poverty is. You just can't get ahead. So what do you think that God thinks when he sees poverty? Well, Jeannie Allen says, knowing God, truly knowing him, means that we're willing to embrace all that God is about, all that he loves, and all that breaks his heart. We are content letting God keep the pain and hurt to himself. But to know God is to know him in his pain too. God sees every child at Rayitos. He sees their suffering and their lack of food, their hopelessness, and their powerlessness. When we stand before God one day, will we really say we didn't know? Will we say that we didn't see the needs of the world, that we chose to look away? What will our excuse be for not getting involved? You've probably heard the story about the starfish. So thousands of starfish were being washed up onto the beach because there was a storm, and the girl was walking along the beach and she was throwing the starfish back into the ocean. And she'd been doing this for a while when a man walked up to her and said, "Why are you doing this? You can't save all the starfish. You can't make a difference." But the little girl leaned down and she picked up the starfish and she threw it into the ocean and said, "I made a difference for that one." So when I'm at Rayitos, everywhere I look, there are needs, and it is overwhelming. But when I hug just one and know that I can help at least just one, Mother Teresa said, if I look at the masses, I will never act. But if I look at the one, I will. So what is God asking of you? Well, for certain, he's asking you to pray, and don't ever underestimate the power of prayer. I love how God meets needs before we even ask. You can't solve all the world's problems, but you can help one child, one person. Maybe it's here in the city. Like listening to you talk about how you provided meals for people that need to eat. Absolutely, your place is here, just one at a time. Maybe it's Reitos, maybe it's another program like Compassion, but who is your one? Target your one. There's a song that I believe sums up all that I want to share with you, and it goes like this. Heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to see the things unseen. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from earth into eternity. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want Jesus to help us see what he sees, to love like he loves, and to break our heart with what breaks his? And so I have a magnet for you. For anyone that wants one, there's one that's going to be sitting beside me when you leave to stick on your refrigerator, just to be a reminder, God, what breaks your heart? And let it break mine too, because I want to be just like you. I want to love you. I want to love like you love. I want to be like you are. So in Matthew 25, it says, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.
Thank you. This slide says, Oremos por Nicaragua, which means pray for Nicaragua. So we would ask you to pray for these needs and things you've heard. If we can advance to the next slide, it just has some thoughts there. Praying for Reitos, for the finances, for God to provide the money. The food costs money, of course. For the leadership there, as Gustavo, a young guy, takes over that ministry, the leadership of that ministry under Pastor Valeriano, and the children there, that they would follow Christ, they would grow up to be the leaders of that neighborhood. And we've just seen over the past month or so some attacks by Satan on this ministry, some difficulties that they've run into. So I pray that God would strengthen that leadership and thwart Satan's plans there. And for the ABW Ministry Center we talked about, for finances, always has been a struggle, especially with the protests and with COVID. I do want to report that the Ministry Center did receive a large gift back in March that will provide for the next couple of years to get through this time. And so we're praising God for that. And then just the COVID effects. It affects the ministry. It's hard to operate the ministry center when you can't have people come, or you're not sure you can have people come, and events get scheduled and then canceled. We had a team that was supposed to come down and teach a children's training program, and they had to cancel. And then, as we mentioned earlier, that COVID is spreading. So pray that our pastors, their churches, would be protected from that, and God would see fit to eliminate COVID from the country. So please pray for Nicaragua. And the last part of this session, I just want to talk about waiting. Waiting. We recently returned from Nicaragua for furlough, but it's a little bit more than that for us. We sold our cars, we sold our furniture, we sold a lot of our stuff and gave a lot of it away. And why did we do that? Well, because we believe that's God's will, first of all, that God has called us back here, at least for a period of time. And the reason for that is because we have a couple sons who are having some struggles launching in life. And we believe that although God has called us to be missionaries and to serve Him, our first ministry is to our family. And we have to make sure that they are taken care of first. And so we're here to help them, give them a foundation, be here for them as they make those next steps in life. And that's hard. It's been difficult. Leaving what God has called us to, the things that we just talked about, and not knowing what's next. But we're waiting, and we don't know what the answer to that is. Waiting is the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And it can be hard. I was talking to Tom Wright before the service, and he mentioned that waiting is a posture of faith. That word in the Bible means a posture of faith. And so as we're waiting, we have to look at that. Am I waiting in faith? Do I have a posture of faith? But it's hard. We don't like to wait. We like to do something. We want to be out there getting something done. Or we want relief from the problem we have. We want things to be successful. We don't want to wait. My personality, I was an accountant before we went to Nicaragua, and it was about efficiency and effectiveness, billing hours, getting things done. And I like to have a plan. If I don't have a spreadsheet, then it can't happen. But if I have everything planned out and figured out, then there's no room for God. It's just going to be my way. When we're waiting, it's common to be asked, so what are you waiting for? If you're in a lobby somewhere or at a food place and you're standing there, often somebody says, what are you waiting for? And so I don't know, can we show the next clip? I don't know if this clip will have sound or not. If we can.
So what are you waiting for?
I don't know. Something amazing, I guess.
Me too, kid.
That's a great clip from The Incredibles, where he says to this kid, what are you waiting for? And he says, something amazing, I guess. And Mr. Incredible says, me too. Because we don't like waiting. We can be discouraged like Mr. Incredible was in this situation. And we're waiting for something amazing, I guess. We're not sure. And there's a lot of examples of waiting in the Bible. Really, if you look at the Bible, there's just about everybody waited. Start with Abraham. He had to wait till he was 75 even to get the promise of a child, and then he had to wait 25 more years till it actually came to be. Joseph, he waited as a slave, he waited as a prisoner till God elevated him to leader of Egypt. Moses, he was in the desert for 40 years till God made him the deliverer of the Israelites, and then he ended up with 40 more years wandering around the desert and never even got to go into the promised land. David, he got anointed king of Israel, but he didn't become king for many years after. Paul, same way. He had his Damascus Road experience, but he didn't become the Paul that we read about in Acts till many years later. In Hebrews 11, where it's full of stories of people who went through great trials and therefore had to wait. And at the very end of Hebrews, after it's listed all these people who had faith, who had a posture of faith, but didn't necessarily didn't see how it turned out. In verse 39, the very end of the verse, or the chapter, it says, all these people that the faith chapter has talked about, were all commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised. God planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So waiting doesn't always give us answers, or we don't always get what we think that we want. Another great story of waiting is found in Joshua. I won't read the passage. I'm sure you guys are well aware of this story when the Israelites entered into the promised land, and their first job was the Battle of Jericho. And Joshua is this new leader of the people. Moses has died. Joshua's leading them in the promised land. He's ready to go, I'm sure. He's ready to prove himself. They've been wandering around in the desert for 40 years, and he's ready to move forward. And then God gives him these crazy instructions. I want you to walk around the city one time for 6 days, and then the last day I want you to do it 7. So you can imagine if that first day they get all the soldiers, everybody's ready for battle, but all they do is walk around the city, and then nothing happens. There's no rumblings, there's no bricks falling, there's no earthquakes, nothing's happening. And they do it again the next day, and the next day. And on day 6, nothing happens. Day 7 comes and they walk around, and still nothing's happening. They're waiting, but nothing happens. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep going even when we don't see results, because we don't know what day we're on. Now, Joshua had the instructions. He knew God told him what was going to happen on day 7, on the 7th time. But we don't always have that. And even when we do, we kind of know, well, God's going to provide. We still start to doubt when we are on day 6, and nothing seems to be any different. We thought, well, I thought I would see something happening by now. Because we want to know why, and we want to know how long, or when it's going to be. We wanted those questions answered, and God doesn't always give us that information. It seems that there's no progress. But we know that God is more interested in what he's doing in us than what we are doing, even if it's for him. Even if we think, oh, God, I could do this great thing for you. The outcome is his responsibility. Ours is faithful obedience. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need our money. He doesn't need our intelligence. He doesn't need our skill. He doesn't need our influence. He doesn't need any of those things. He's more interested in who we are than what we do. So I'm sure maybe in your mind you're thinking through some things that you're waiting on. Maybe it's an illness. Maybe it's a financial difficulty. Maybe it's a ministry issue. And you're thinking about that. How God would want God to answer and fix that, take care of it, move it forward. So the question I have for you, what day are you on? Maybe you're on day 1 and you got ways to go. Maybe you're on day 6. Maybe you're on day 7 and you're almost there, but you don't know it. I encourage you to be faithful and obedient, trusting God. Because we learn by our waiting. That's what God uses waiting to teach us. So I just want to talk a few principles here quickly about what we learn when we're waiting, or what God is trying to teach us. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the first question that often comes up when we should ask ourselves when we're waiting is, what kind of God am I serving? What kind of God am I serving? Am I serving a God who's kind of like me, who has limits like me? Do we think too little of God? Is God just a slightly more powerful version of us? But the truth is, our power is much less than God's, and so is our wisdom. Isaiah 55 tells us that God's ways are so much higher than our ways, like the heavens are above the earth. And then do we believe in God's love? Do we grasp how much he really loves us, even though he's making us wait? Romans 8:32 says, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? What more does God need to do to prove his commitment to us? He is a faithful and trustworthy God who loves us. So we have to trust in that love. And our belief about God affects our thoughts and our actions. In fact, some people would say our view of God is the most important influence in our life. So what kind of God am I serving? And secondly, the lordship. Is he Lord of my life? Is he Lord of all of it? Because if he's not Lord of all of it, he's not really Lord at all. So what part am I holding back in this waiting? What part do I want to not let him have control over? And then the sufficiency. God uses waiting to teach us that He is enough. I'll just turn real quick here to Lamentations 3. Lamentations 3 has some famous verses we always quote, and we'll read them as part of this passage here. But often, I always enjoy reading the verses around the famous verses because there's usually other really good stuff in there that we're missing. We're only getting part of the story. In Lamentations 3:19-26, it says, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore I will wait for Him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to the one who seeks Him. It is good to wait patiently or quietly for the salvation of the Lord. So the writer here, it's the book of Lamentations, so of course he's going through difficult times, and he talks about that and how he remembers the difficulty. But he also remembers the truth that God's love and His faithfulness are so great, they're new every morning. And in verse 24 it says, I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for Him. And portion there is just like when you go through the buffet line and somebody gives you some and you look at that portion and you think, well, that's not very much. Or they say, is that enough? And you say, no, I'd like a little more. And you say, that's enough. That's a good portion. And it's the same thing here. God is our portion. He is enough. So just flip the next slide here. It doesn't have anything on it except for plan. When we're waiting, we have to give God room to work out His plan. We have to believe He has a plan and give Him room to do it. We don't like to do that because we don't like uncertainty. We want to have the plan. We want to know what's going on. But we must believe that God has a plan. There's a quote I read recently by somebody named Andy Hale. I don't even know who that is, but the quote said, trust the wait, embrace the uncertainty, enjoy the beauty of becoming. When nothing is certain, anything is possible. And that goes back to what I said earlier about when I have a plan, that's really the only thing that's possible, my plan, because that's the only thing I'm working towards. But if I open up and say, God, I'm open to your plan, then anything is possible. But we just have to give Him room to work. If we can go to the next slide, please. The next part of it is to understand when we're waiting that God has a purpose in it. This could be a list as long as we could be here all day talking about the purposes that God has for us waiting. I just want to hit these kind of highlights quickly. The first one is patience and endurance. I mean, patience is kind of obvious, right? When we're waiting, that's the one thing that we don't often have. We say, God, give me patience and give it to me now. But that's what God's teaching us, patience. And out of that patience, then He teaches us endurance, which is, endurance is just being patient and obedient and trusting over a long period of time. We want relief from our problem or our issue, but God wants us to become like Him. In Romans 8:28, we often read that verse, right? That's one of those famous verses that we all read, we quote to one another. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. And we stop there. And that's a good verse. It has a lot of good things to say, and it reminds us that God works out things for good. Of course, according to His definition of good, which is the right definition. But we need to read verse 29. It tells us what that good is. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of His Son. That's God's main purpose, that we be like His Son. Again, He's responsible for the results. We're responsible for who we are. So we learn patience and endurance. We also learn humility, that we need him. When we're waiting on him, it reminds us that we need him. We get busy doing things and forget sometimes that we really need God. We think we're doing it on our own strength. I have a quote that I often use in jest, but I say, when I gave up hope, I felt a lot better. And really what I mean is I gave up hope in what I can do. And I put my hope in the right place. Then I feel a lot better because God's in control. So we learn humility, we learn prayer. Waiting drives us back to God. I don't know why it is when we're busy, one of the first things to go is praying about what we're busy about. We'd say, I got to go get it done. And we forget that God will help us get it done. I think it was Martin Luther, I don't remember if I'm quoting the wrong person, who said something like, I have so many things to get done today that I have to spend hours in prayer. And then it also, of course, builds our faith and our trust. As we're waiting, we're determining in our hearts whether we really have faith and trust in God. That posture of trust. Do we have it or don't we? And then overcoming fear. Do we have a fear that's holding us back? Fear often keeps us from being obedient. And every one of us has probably a different fear. We have a lot of common fears, but we have something that holds us back from doing something that God has called us to, a certain relationship, overcoming a sin that we have in our lives, our finances, sharing the truth with somebody else, transitions, making a hard decision. We have fears that hold us back. But as we wait, God can work on those fears. And the last one here is the joy to come. When we're waiting, one of the things we can do is wait with anticipation of what God's going to do. And the joy to come, that's what Christ did. In Hebrews, is it 12:2? Yes, it talks about for the joy that was set before him, Christ endured the cross. How was he able to make it through that horrible experience, dying on the cross, being separated from his Father? Because of the joy that he knew was coming. The joy of having a right relationship with us and having provided a way of salvation for us. That's what caused him to get through, and for us, it can be the same as well. And sometimes we think we're waiting on God, but really he's waiting on us to learn some of these lessons and purposes. You think, God, why aren't you acting? He's saying, well, I can't do that. You're not ready yet. It's just like with our children. We wouldn't send them out to do something that we know that they're going to fail at, that's going to be difficult and they can't do. We'd say, no, you need to learn these lessons first before we send you. Another thing that God does in waiting is protect us. Sometimes we think we know what we want, but God's saying, no, I have a better plan. You're going to have to wait. We think about that sometimes when we're driving and we see a car accident, we realize God delayed us 5 minutes in leaving the house or something, and now that would have been us in that car accident. Or with a relationship that was not very good for us, that God protected us from that. And then lastly, your timing. Timing. We learn about God's timing. Really, waiting is about timing, right? We want to know that time that it's going to work out. But it matters. Just like in baking. If you bake some cookies and you put them in the oven, you can't take them out in 2 minutes. That's not the right timing. You can't leave them in for 20 minutes. That's not the right timing. There's a right amount of time. Or in baseball, if you're standing there at the plate and the pitcher throws the ball, there's a time to swing that bat. And some of the most successful major league pitchers have been great because they change speeds, right? So the timing of the batter is off. But we have to wait on God's timing without full knowledge, without knowing when God's going to provide or give the answer that we want. But he's never early and he's never late. He's just in time. There's a story told by Corrie ten Boom about her father one time when she was struggling with this, and he set her down in the bed and said, when we go on a train trip to Amsterdam, when do I give you your ticket? And she said, well, right before we get on the train. And he said, exactly. I give it to you when you need it. And that's exactly what God does. He gives us what we need when we need it. So God teaches us a lot when we're waiting. And we need to wait in expectation. And ask ourselves, what day am I on? And remember that God has promised that he will answer in his timing. So people ask you, well, what are you waiting for? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes, though, people are asking you in a little bit different tone. What are you waiting for? You're behind that car at the light turns green, and you say, they don't go, and you're waiting. You're like, what are you waiting for? Get going. And that's what they're telling you is there's a time for action, right? That light turned green. It's time for you to go. There's no reason to wait anymore. And so that's true for us too. Eventually, we may be in a time of waiting, and often we are. But there's also a time for action. And when that time comes, we need to act. And I just want to list a few things here. And this is kind of in the vein of thinking about what God is calling you to do. I know there's a lot of different things you're waiting for. Might have to do with health or finances or job decisions, those kind of things. And that kind of hits this. But this is more thinking what God would have you to do to serve him. So first of all, in the waiting, be devoted to God and who he created you to be. Learn the lessons, right? If God's having you wait, then our job in that waiting is to learn the lessons he has for us and be devoted to him. We could pray. Prayer is a powerful thing for us and for the situation that we're talking about. And then as you see that as you're doing those things, you're becoming who God wants you to be, you're praying about what God wants you to do, then look for where God wants you to act. The first place could be at this church. We heard about a need for Awana leaders. It could be that. It could be some other aspect of the church. Sometimes God gives you a specific passion or interest in a certain area. So if God's talking to you and that comes into your mind, the Holy Spirit speaks to you, act on that. And then look for ways to get outside this church walls. What is the ministry that God's calling you to outside the walls? Your neighbors, your work, some ministry that you can get involved in. And get your family involved. Make that decision to act. And then look for ways to get involved in missions. This church is very supportive of missions and has a great missions program. If you're not involved in that through this church, find a way to do it. Get to know some missionary families. Invite one that comes through over for dinner, or get to know them and pray for them as a family. Send them a gift. Support them. Help them out when they come on furlough, or ask them what you could help them with, the need that they might have. And then look for ways you can give. Certainly give through this church. That's the number one vehicle of giving for God's work, especially for missions. But if you see a special need that God's pricking your heart about, give to that. Make that action. And then take a short-term mission trip. We talked about the trip that the group took here and Pastor Jeff talked about how that changed his heart. A short-term mission trip can do that. It doesn't even have to be to another country. It could be in another part of the United States or part of Columbus. But consider going overseas, because sometimes that's what God uses to prick your heart, change your heart, or maybe even to lead you to do that. And that's the last thing I would say is consider where God may be calling you to a ministry. Maybe to be a missionary, or maybe just a ministry in this church, or a ministry in your community. But there's a time for waiting, and there's a time for action. Right now, we're in a time of waiting. And that doesn't mean we're not doing anything, because waiting never means that. We're seeking what God has for us, and we're focusing on who he wants us to be. As I'm sure many of you, we realize there's areas of our life that we need to address and we need to work on. And we're exploring options for what's next. Whether it be a role with ABWE, continuing in some way with ABWE, or another ministry, or just another secular job. We have different feelings and thoughts about that, but in the end, we're open to what God has. Whatever he has, that's what we want to do. So we're waiting impatiently for God to reveal that, but we don't want to rush ahead of him. We don't want to just make a decision because that feels better to have a decision made. We're open to whatever he has. And like Abraham, when he left and was sent out by God, he didn't know where he was going. We don't know where we're going either, and that can be really difficult, but we plan to take these next couple months and allow God to reveal that. And for all of you as well, I'm sure there's something you're waiting on. I'm sure there's something that you would say, boy, I wish God would take care of that, or I wish I knew the answer to that. Wait with expectation. Wait on God, trusting who he is, his plan, his purpose, his protection, and his timing. And then when people ask you about it, what are you waiting for? You can say, something amazing, I guess.